I'm getting ready to do a little figure painting, and while I was getting ready I thought this is a good opportunity to introduce you guys that don't know about it to the theory or the idea of a wet palette. Now in the past when I've painted, I've always used either these little plastic paint pots, these little palettes, or palette paper, which is an emulsion type paper that paint doesn't soak into. But the only problem with these is if you're using acrylics and water-based paint, the paint dries out pretty quickly in these, so you don't have a lot of time to go in and work with it and thin it out and paint. So recently some of the manufacturers have come up with some really nice wet palettes, and the one we're going to look at today is from AKI Interactive. That's this guy right here, the wet palette. It's a really nice piece of equipment, nice tool. What it is an airtight container, as you can see. We'll take the lid off, and it has a seal inside, a rubber seal around the inside of it to keep it airtight. And it comes with a sponge to hold your water. You put the sponge in, you wet it, put it in there, and it also comes with paper. This is palette paper, or parchment paper, and you take one sheet of that, you put it in on top of the sponge, and you wet that. So you've got basically a wet sponge with a wet piece of palette paper in it. And you say, well, what's the advantage of that? Well, the advantage is I can keep my paints on this palette paper, thin them easily, and since the palette paper is wet, it keeps my paint nice and thin and fresh. Plus it's easier to mix that way. And the real advantage is when I'm done, and you know when you're figure painting you make certain mixes of color, and if you're not finished it's really hard to reduplicate or match that color you've mixed. So if you have the paint mixed here, you can take your lid that has the airtight seal in it, pop it on there, and just clip it together. You hear all that snapping. This is airtight now, and my paint is in there. My paint palette is sealed in there, so it can dry out. I keep them in the refrigerator. I take this and put it in the fridge. That keeps my paint even fresher. After about 3-4 days, if there's still paint in there on the palette, I take the sponge out, squeeze out the water, rinse it off, clean out the inside of the container, re-wet the sponge, put it in, take my palette paper that still has paint on it, put it back in there, and then seal it. So basically this keeps your paint mixes, it keeps your paint fresh, makes it easy to thin your paint. It's just a really, really great way to paint with acrylics and water-based paint. So let's take a look at the hands-on. I'll show you exactly how to put this together. So I've come out here to my sink, and I'm going to show you basically how easy it is to set up the wet palette. So we'll open the container. You see there's nothing in it yet. And I'll take one of these, the sponge that goes in the bottom. And what we'll do is we'll wet the sponge down. Get it nice and wet. And we'll take the container and just lay the sponge into it. You can see there's a lot of water on that sponge. And then we'll take a piece of the palette paper. We'll lay it right down on top of the sponge. Now, I like to put a little more water in there just to settle the sponge down. And you can pour the excess water out. And the sponge and the paper will adhere to the sponge, and it'll take itself down, get flat. And then that's all there is to it. I mean, that's basically it. I'll put my container lid on, and that's your wet palette.